On March 27, 2011, the Nintendo 3DS was released in North America. It was a surprising failure out of the gate, prompting Nintendo to do the unthinkable and slash the price by $80 just 5 months later. But the $250 price tag wasn't the sole reason for the flaccid sales, the launch titles just weren't that exciting. While Ocarina of Time 3D was coming out in a few months, and Super Mario 3D Land and Mario Kart 7 would arrive by the end of the year, the biggest names on day one were Pilotwings, Street Fighter, and Nintendogs, except the Nintendogs fad had passed, and the only addition to the sequel was Cats, the obviously superior pet. While I'm someone who prides themselves on blindly supporting Nintendo with each system release, even though I've been punished every single time going months without any worthwhile games, I drew the line when it came to the 3DS. $250 was too much money, and I had no interest in Nintendo's first-party lineup. But now, 14 years later, I've succumbed to my midlife crisis and begun thinking about how much better things were back in 2011. So in an attempt to recapture a magic that is out of reach for someone like me who grows 2 new nose hairs for each one he plucks, I bought and played every Nintendo 3DS launch game in 2025. The rules are fairly simple. I played each game for at least 1 hour. If you don't think that's enough time, just remember that there's 16 games to get through. And it's not like it was a 1-hour cap. If I enjoyed the game, I could have played until I beat it. I didn't really do that though. Oh, and for those wondering, Face Raiders and AR games were off the table. Get it? Because you have to hold the 3DS to play them? You'll laugh tomorrow. But I only wanted to focus on the games that I had to buy from eBay, meaning Nintendo didn't see a penny from them. And that's where we'll start, with Nintendo's trio of 3DS launch games. Unlike the rest of you monsters, I never abandoned a Nintendog 20 years ago. So Nintendogs plus Cats was my first introduction to the mega franchise that dominated the DS sales charts, and promptly faded away on 3DS, just like a cat's love for you when you buy them an automatic feeder. Despite being a simulation game, it's much better than The Sims, which I'll talk about in a bit. Because, as we all know, dogs are better than humans. I mean, when's the last time you got excited about a random human licking your face and sniffing your butt? After picking a boxer named Rocky, I taught her to sit. While a fairly boring activity, it's fun to see your dog grow and respond to your voice commands. Problem is, every new trick you teach your dog follows a similar pattern. For left paw, you lift their left paw up, then say left paw or damn it Rocky, quit sniffing that lady's butt, and repeat it 2 more times to lock it in. I enjoyed the core activity of raising a dog, but Nintendogs is the chore of raising a dog, walking it, picking up poop, feeding them, without the joy of, actually owning a dog. There's just a virtual pet that, while cute, has no soul behind those eyes. Nintendogs was all the rage when it came out in 2005, selling 24 million copies. But when the 3DS sequel dropped in 2011 like a Rocky Deuce, it only pawed its way to 4 million sold. So in just 6 years, the craze had ended. Now 14 years later, I can see why. There's just no instant gratification. I have to take my dog on walks, watch it go to the bathroom a surprising amount of times, teach it tricks, and go to the store to buy food and water so it stays healthy. The only joy from the experience is in the competitions, which are disc throwing and lure racing. And Rocky was terrible at competitions, it definitely wasn't me. These are the only ways to earn money from what I could see, and that's how you're able to buy new puppies and kittens. Except the game doesn't tell you how much a new pet costs until you get to the kennel and go to choose one, and every single one I wanted cost $500 more than I had. Overall, I was disappointed by Nintendogs. There's just not enough to do that's better than mundane. It's still a C-tier game because everything works as it should, and it can trick your brain at times into thinking you're raising a real dog. Except it stays a puppy forever, and you don't get to endure watching the slow, heart-wrenching decay into oldness a real dog would go through. A Nintendog can be forgotten. A real dog will remain with you forever, even when they're gone. Despite anyone who's ever played Pilotwings Resort trying to convince you that it's actually really good, the second of Nintendo's 3 3DS launch titles only has a Metacritic score of 71. Not bad, tying it with Nintendogs, until you realize this was Nintendo's second biggest launch title. The best way to describe Pilotwings Resort is that it's a racing game without opponents. Instead of trying to finish in first, you have to complete a set of missions, such as fly through these rings, land on this pad, or try to figure out why some random person without limbs was given a plane to pilot after just 60 seconds of training. Trust me when I say it takes much longer than that to learn how autopilot works. In those missions, you take control of 3 different vehicles: a plane, a jetpack, or a hang glider. The plane gives you the most freedom and speed, the jetpack is annoying as hell and requires precise movement, and the hang glider is a hang glider. They do add variations like giving your Mii a fighter jet from Top Gun, or having your jetpack fall off and forcing you to plummet towards the ground at 110 miles an hour in a freaking squirrel suit. But despite how exciting that might sound, the best word to describe Pilotwings Resort is relaxing. The music is calm, there's nothing distracting on screen, and the game itself is easy, with the only challenge coming from getting those 3 stars in each mission. But there's a fine line between relaxing and boring, and Pilotwings dips at least 2 long, slippery toes in the boring part. The first few tiers are stupidly easy to clear, and getting those 3 stars takes minimal effort. Things do intensify once you reach the gold and platinum levels though. Restarting is all but guaranteed to fix your mistakes, and the owners of Woohoo Island even trust you enough to give you a supercharged jetpack, ignoring the fact that your bare butt cheeks are centimeters away from 2 massive engines. Problem is, the game just kinda ends after that. There's only a few hours worth of content here with little reason to return. For most of these launch games, I didn't beat them because I'm a very busy man. I mean, planes don't fly themselves. With Pilotwings, I did beat it, so I can confidently say it's a C-tier experience. Sure, I could have spent another hour getting 3 stars in every level, but the gameplay wasn't quite good enough to justify it. Nintendo's third and final 3DS launch title is Steel Diver. I did play a bit of the free-to-play sequel Sub Wars and had a little fun, so I was interested to see what a full-fledged version looked like. Well, let's just say there's a reason why we have more Denpa Men games than Steel Diver games. It's not that Steel Diver's bad, it's that it's subpar. Get it? Subpar? Anyways, my first surprise was that Steel Diver was in 2D. Instead of a 3D plane like Sub Wars, it's only left to right in the first game, which makes it seem very limited. And it's not like there's a ton of features. However exciting you think controlling a submarine is going to be, Steel Diver slaps you across the face and forces you to maneuver slowly while giving you the choice of just 3 different subs, each with noticeable variations. Unfortunately, there's nothing special about the gameplay. One mission has you dodging falling volcanic rock, except the field of view is so limited it's tough to see them, and sometimes enemy subs or ships will appear, but there's just 7 missions. Yes, 7. And all can be cleared in 5 to 10 minutes. Then it's basically a few boring time trials before the content dries up. Do you want to know the ultimate bullcrap? Mission 6 of 7 is locked until you complete all 5 previous missions with all 3 submarines. No one in their right mind would think that's a good idea. But that lack of missions and forced replayability kinda drives home the fact that this was rushed for the 3DS launch. And the tacked-on periscope mode was probably added at the last minute to show off the gyroscope features of the 3DS, which like 2 other games also used. Due to the lack of content and somewhat boring gameplay, I have to put Steel Diver in C tier. Since Ubisoft was such a major contributor to launch games on 3DS, let's continue on with their offerings, which, true to their name, didn't make me hard. Like most early adopters of the Game Boy Advance, my first game was the enjoyable Rayman Advance. Unfortunately, the 3DS version of Rayman received overly negative reviews, which turned me off more than a girl who thinks The Hobbit is better than Lord of the Rings, so I had avoided it altogether. And the fact that Super Mario 3D Land became my favorite 3DS game made me completely discount ever trying Rayman's 3D adventure. But finally, after 14 years, I'm going to be playing the first Rayman game on 3DS. Yeah, let's just say there's a reason why 3D Rayman is dead and 2D Rayman is so well received. Anytime you put a 3D game onto a system with only one analog stick, you're left with a challenge. Some shooters use the touchscreen as your right stick. Others will allow you to look left and right with the L and R buttons. Rayman 3D only uses the L button to lock the camera to you, with R letting you look around. Remember how God of War used the right stick to dodge, and it was clear the developer spent a lot of time fine-tuning the fixed camera, ensuring annoyances were minimized? That's not the case with Rayman. The camera is a major obstacle, never quite doing what you want. And the default angle is slightly too low for my taste. But who cares about frivolous things like the camera? How is the platforming? Well, it's alright. Rayman 3D is a slightly above average 3D platformer. The environments are somewhat bland and lifeless, but the levels are cohesive enough. Whether it's unfair or not, I couldn't help comparing it to Super Mario 3D Land, and there's just no comparison. 3D Land has brilliant design, gameplay, graphics, music, sound, and just about everything else. Rayman 3D feels like a game that came out last century, probably because it did. Although it isn't mentioned anywhere, Rayman 3D is a port of Rayman 2, which wasn't exactly a Game of the Year contender. The platforming is okay, the combat is unsatisfying, the camera sucks, the lack of sound effects and constantly loud music is weird, and the level design leaves much to be desired. The Metacritic score for Rayman 3D is 61%, and that's around what I would give it. It's obvious that Ubisoft just looked at their catalog of games, found the easiest one to port to 3DS, and called it a day. Rayman 3D only further reinforces that my decision to skip the 3DS at launch was a wreck. Speaking of games Ubisoft threw onto the 3DS at launch and hoped people would buy without looking up the quality first, we have Asphalt 3D. Throwing shade at Ridge Racer 3D by calling itself the first ever authentic 3D racing experience on Nintendo, Asphalt 3D has a Metascore of 43, while Ridge Racer is at 75. Yeah, maybe they shouldn't have said that. But how exactly can you screw up a racing game? You hold A to go, and that's literally all there is to a racing game. Well, after my first race, I thought I must have sustained a head injury or something because I had fun. The handling was tight, the sense of speed and boosting was well done, there was a level of burnout gameplay where you could take down other racers and hit traffic, there were items to constantly pick up and even a shortcut or two in each course. Honestly, the only things I disliked at that point were the atrocious load times when looking at your car and the bottom screen map that wasn't even as good as Mario Kart DS. Now, I know that Asphalt is a long-running franchise on mobile, but I've never really played any of them, and it's not my ass's fault. I've just never been one to play games on a phone. It's the boomer in me. It's the same reason why I use official copies of games instead of downloading them. It's ingrained in my DNA to bow to Nintendo and other companies and give them my money even when I'm buying the game second foot and there's no chance they see a single cent for my purchase. I say all this because it means I'm not jaded. So after an hour of Asphalt 3D, did my initial opinion wane like the moon? Or did it wax like the stuff I drip on my toes each night to feel something? Well, remember that car ramming I talked about? Just like Burnout, if you hit someone head on, you crash. But because the graphics in Asphalt are, shall we say, less than stellar with absolutely horrendous pop-in, it can be difficult to see far enough ahead. Not to mention that the power-ups can obscure your vision of a car right behind them. Then there's drifting. Mario Kart, this is not. Drifting is done almost without control. It builds up boost, which is absolutely necessary, it's just not a particularly fun mechanic to take advantage of. Although there's a few different game modes, one is literally just taking down your opponents a la Burnout, the tracks do repeat a bit more than I wanted. There are 9 in total, but they're reused too much, and aside from a couple shortcuts, they're less exciting than any fight Captain Marvel's in because she's apparently unstoppable with an uncapped power level. Then we come to Drift, the reason I stopped playing. There's a game mode where you have to rack up 10,000 drift points, except the first time around I didn't even get half. The track is not specifically built for drifting, and again, drifting isn't very good. So instead of subjecting myself to that over and over again, I gave up. Because when things get too difficult, I found that giving up is the smartest thing. I definitely had some fun in that first hour of Asphalt 3D, but there's just not enough here for me to say it's actually a good game. Still, I'm okay placing it in C tier. As someone whose only age restriction is triple digits, I'm no stranger to dinosaurs. So I was excited to try Combat of Giants Dinosaurs 3D, yet another Ubisoft published 3DS launch game. I'll be honest, I wasn't sure what I thought this would be. Maybe a 2D fighter, maybe a Pokemon clone? Well, I wasn't expecting to have to defeat the evil Ankylosaurus by meandering around cramped hallways and beating off other dinosaurs in uninspired combat, that's for sure. There's a sliver of a story here, like when someone gets a tiny hole in their sock because of a sharp toenail. It has something to do with that Ankylosaurus guy and uniting the champion dinosaurs or something to kill it. But this isn't that Disney movie about dinosaurs no one watched. This is Combat of Dinosaurs. And quite frankly, the combat's terrible. In fact, the whole game is terrible. In between those battles, you trudge slowly through the most uninspired hallways, occasionally getting a boner that you have to hide from other people. Then you get into a battle which requires a loading screen. If they glow red, you dodge and then mash B. If they glow blue, you hit them. It's basically Simon Says with dinosaurs. And I says this game doesn't make me horny like a stegosaur. It's also worth noting that the touchscreen isn't used at all. The bottom screen is used for choosing your equipment, but if you try to tap it with something long and hard, nothing happens. So your 3DS basically turns into my ex-wife. The worst part about Combat of Giants is that you know some parent bought it alongside the 3DS for their kid, and it was the only game they had for months. It never should have been made, and it deserves its spot at the bottom of this tier list. Out of all the 3DS launch games, Ghost Recon Shadow Wars was the only one I'd beaten. This was several years ago before Swifties would come at you en masse for saying her latest album was mid. But I recall Ghost Recon being good, just not on the level of Advance Wars. Playing it again in 2025, as sad as this is to say, Shadow Wars is the first actually good 3DS launch game I've played so far in this video. Taking a tactical approach, the gameplay is exactly what you'd expect. You control a variety of soldiers, including snipers, medics, and heavy gunners, moving them around the grid-based battlefield. There's terrain bonuses, return fire, and even super shots for added damage. For a game that likely had a shortened development window to be out in time for 3DS launch, they did a great job nailing what it takes to be an enjoyable Advance Wars clone. While Shadow Wars gets the core of a tactics game down right, there are things holding it back. The gameplay is a bit slow, same with the movement, the music isn't memorable, and the story is completely skippable with generic evil Russians invading neighboring countries. But what it gets right, it absolutely nails. It's disappointing that it never received a sequel to expand upon the good foundation, though given it was a relatively under-the-radar launch game in a niche genre from a series no one equates with the handheld, sales must have been horrific. Still, if you want a reason to bust out your 3DS in 2024, this isn't a good one. I mean, there's Mario 3D Land and A Link Between Worlds and all those Pokemon games that have aged better than my second ex-wife. What I'm trying to say is that Ghost Recon is in the top 2 best 3DS launch games, and that's kinda sad. What would a system launch be without sports games? After releasing several numbered Maddens on DS, EA decided that numbers are for nerds and simply called the 3DS entry Madden NFL Football. Best of all, as the back of the box proudly proclaims, you can use the amazing power of the 3DS touchscreen to draw up plays, because no other Nintendo handheld in history had a touchscreen. Now, I've never been much of a video game football fan. No matter how hard I try, every game just devolves into me running backwards, throwing Hail Marys, and hoping for the best. Naturally, that happened again here. It's not my fault, okay? The game does have a practice mode, they just don't really help on the whole learning how to play video game football thing. What I liked was the license music, I'm guessing it was carried over from the console versions, as well as the commentary from Chris Collinsworth and Gus Johnson. No, not that Gus Johnson. But the gameplay and graphics are extremely bland. The crowd may as well not be there, and the menus look like they were designed in 30 minutes. On the gameplay side, defense is one of the most boring things I've ever experienced. The opposing team has a penchant for throwing interceptions, and wide open receivers really like to drop the ball. Another issue is that I don't know what any of these plays are. I don't know what an MLB smash fire or cover one plug is. Just use normal words. Because it wasn't as simple as passing play or running play, I ended up using the game flow play rather than asking Madden, which causes a couple second stutter while Madden simulates the game flow. When I eventually started feeling the flow after an hour, I realized there's just not a whole lot here in 11 on 11. Things were much more my speed in 5 on 5. You simply choose run or pass, and each side gets 4 downs to score a touchdown. I went into a season in this mode, skipped straight to the playoffs, and adjusted the settings so each game was first to 3 touchdowns. While it's not a great thing that I changed things so I could play Madden for as little time as possible, 5 on 5 was much more palatable. In that Super Bowl March, I obviously chose the Patriots. I came back to beat Peyton Manning's Colts in round 1. Round 2 was comical. The AI isn't great, so I just blitzed on every play. I literally sacked Phillip Rivers 10 times in that game and ran the ball for a touchdown on the next play because they'd always turn it over inside their own 10-yard line. Ben Roethlisberger's AI was copy and pasted from Phillip Rivers, so I sacked him on 7 of their 8 plays to reach the Vikings in the Super Bowl. Yeah, like they could actually do that in real life. Brett Favre was a bit more smarter than the other quarterbacks and managed to score a touchdown, but the Patriots won the Super Bowl as they should. And all I got for my troubles was text on the screen saying I won the Super Bowl. Yeah, really high quality stuff there, EA. Ultimately, I'm not really sure how to store this as I've never been a Madden fan. As a video game fan, this is lacking game modes, smart AI, and decent graphics. All I can really say for sure is that this game didn't call an audible to change my stance, but thankfully I still have a tight end. You didn't think there was just one sports game released at 3DS launch, did you? Unlike Madden, which critics hated, Pro Evolution Soccer 2011 saw much more favorable reviews, garnering a 73 on Metacritic. While the sports games I enjoy start with an NHL and end in a hits, I did go into PES 2011 with clear eyes and full hearts. Wait, wrong football. Anyways, if you've never heard of soccer before, it's like Rocket League except with people instead of cars. For Pro Evolution on 3DS, the first thing you'll notice is that the menus are absolutely atrocious. The text is hard to read, and it all looks like they did it during their lunch break. The in-match graphics are fine though. Like when I was 5 years old at a motel pool on my way to the Grand Canyon, I dove right in and played as the soccer powerhouse Canada. It was a 5-minute exhibition game for me to learn the controls, and there was a total of 1 shot from both sides. Despite the boringness, the commentators told me it was thrilling. Yeah, sure. We played an extra 30 minutes with no more shots, and it ended in a 0-0 draw. Boringness aside, I could definitely see that this was the superior sports game at 3DS launch. Still, as someone who didn't come in a fan of soccer games and sports games in general, a 14-year-old 3DS launch game did nothing to change my mind. Everything works as it should, and yes, it's better than Madden, but I still wouldn't choose to play either if I was given the choice. So I banished PES to C tier. In my 69 years on your planet, I've played a few LEGO games, but since I'm not a child who has one hand on the controller and another hand on Subway Surfers, I never found the desire to finish one. And that theme continued with LEGO Star Wars 3 for Nintendo 3DS. While a lot of the other launch titles are exclusive-ish to Nintendo's new handheld that utilizes a crazy glassesless 3D effect, an effect that I'm sure will catch on and dominate the industry for decades to come, and Nintendo totally won't abandon it after a couple of years and introduce a new version of the system that doesn't even have it, LEGO Star Wars 3 is a clone. A stripped-down clone with missing features and content compared to its console brethren, I might add. So, you know that movie with Dave Chappelle where millions of people learned that Bob Saget wasn't America's dad and he's actually an R-rated comedian? Half-Baked sums up the Clone Wars fairly well. It's the kind of game you could buy for your kid and they'd be able to play all the way through without hating it, but it's clearly lacking any sort of depth. The gameplay loop mostly consists of mashing Y to kill some droids, holding A on any leftover piles of LEGO blocks until it builds something, and listening to the god-awful annoying dunt sound from R2-D2 whenever you stand near any point of interest, including those LEGO bricks that made me play with the freaking sound off because it was every 10 freaking seconds. I know I need to hold A to build a LEGO R2, you don't have to keep reminding me. To mix things up, the second mission does take things to space. Rogue Squadron 4, this is not. You basically just hold Y a bunch and shoot some missiles at a few blocks. I liked how they added some variety to the gameplay, it's just that it ended up being like that cake your mother served me on my birthday, half-baked. I watched Half-Baked recently if you couldn't tell. The third mission has you playing as clone troopers blasting droids. If I sound bored talking about the game, that's because there's nothing to be excited about here. While I can see a little bit of the fun they tried to inject into LEGO Star Wars, ultimately it ends up being the definition of mediocrity. Compared to Asphalt, Ridge Racer 3D does almost everything better. The graphics, audio, and handling are all improved, making Ubisoft's Racer look like a cheap knockoff. Problem is, it's just not a ton of fun for someone like me who prefers arcadey racers. The core of Ridge Racer is doing wacky drifts while slipstreaming behind people and boosting when the moment arrives. But there's nothing else. And when you're in first place, everything becomes so bland and predictable. Playing through Asphalt and Ridge Racer definitely gave me a newfound appreciation for Mario Kart. While Mario Kart may not have the best single-player content, the tracks, gameplay, and controls are all perfect. And there's just so much character oozing from Mario Kart like a pop blister, whereas Ridge Racer is drier than my feet after not lotioning them for a few days. One major advantage Ridge Racer has over Asphalt is the ability to purchase items. If you're having a tough time in a race, just buy some nitrous and give yourself a boost against the competition. While newer, better cars are always a plus, this at least allows quick and easy help if you're stuck. But the single-player campaign starts off so easy that I never needed them. In fact, it was more likely that I'd lead the entire final lap than actually have to try. While Ridge Racer is a better overall game than Asphalt, it hasn't stood the test of time. I'd never choose it over something like Mario Kart 7. Whether it's the AI lady telling me you got owned when someone passing me, or saying I think I'm gonna be sick when going airborne, or the glacially slow progression in the Grand Prix that's way too easy, Ridge Racer just has too much holding it back. Still, in terms of 3DS launch titles, it's up there, which again is kinda sad. I know this might be hard to believe, but monkeys open bananas from the bottom. Also, I've never really played a Super Monkey Ball game before, despite there being like 50 entries in the series. So what are my thoughts after spanking my monkey and playing with my balls for a few hours? Well, while I didn't love this entry, I can see why the franchise has endured for so long. My biggest gripe is the dizzy factor. Instead of controlling the monkey, you control the stage. Like doing jumping jacks in summertime, your balls just kind of fly all over the place depending on how much you tilt the stage. That's important because the whole goal is getting your monkey to the goal without falling off the edge. Think unethical mini golf, except instead of hitting the ball, you move the green. Potential puking factor aside, Monkey Ball's not bad. While the first two worlds are painfully easy, the difficulty steadily increases. Only having 60 seconds to reach the goal adds a sense of urgency, and not all ledges have safety barriers. So going too fast could send you flying off the edge. But going too slow causes you to time out. It's just a really fun gameplay loop that I never really got sick of, which is the opposite of how playing the game made me feel. Unfortunately, there exists a major problem. It's shorter than the original Justice League cut. I looked it up and Monkey Ball games aren't known for their length, but less than 2 hours for the main campaign is disappointing. There's also very little in terms of memorable levels, and the difficulty never gets to where it needs to be. It really feels like Sega decided they wanted a 3DS launch game, slap some leftover Monkey Ball levels together, and called it a day. Well, almost. Probably because they saw how quick the campaign is, they decided to throw Mario Kart in here because why not? And when I say they copied Mario Kart, I mean it. Pretty much everything is the same except the graphics and controls leave much to be desired. Then there's Monkey Fight. Imagine Smash Bros, except it sucks. I would have more to say about this mode, but that's literally all Monkey Fight is. Overall, I had some fun in my first ever Monkey Ball game. It's just clear that this 3DS launch title is severely lacking in content and good courses. Warriors is another franchise I'm popping my cherry with in this video. For the 3DS launch, Tecmo Koei, or Koei Tecmo, or whatever they were called at the time, gave us Samurai Warriors Chronicles, or Chronicles Samurai Warriors, depending on how you read the title. If you're unfamiliar with the series, basically you're a random guy who for some reason has the ability to mow down 300 plus enemies in a single battle. Gimli would be jealous. While there is a story here, I couldn't follow it. They just keep throwing a dozen different names at you and expect you to keep up, but the base of it is, people are warring, you are a warrior. You run into a group of enemies, easily wipe out the weaklings, try to find the person with a name, defeat them, and do that a dozen times until the mission is over. But it's not always easy. I actually lost the second mission my first time around. Not because I was too weak or got beaten off. No, I was supposed to chase a couple of random people who weren't sufficiently highlighted on the map, and as I was running after them, other people with names appeared who I thought were the targets. Obviously I was wrong, but it meant I failed after 20 minutes of fairly monotonous gameplay, resulting in me having to replay the mission. That lack of direction continued in the third mission. I was supposed to protect these random guys, yet failed because the pop-in is so atrocious at times that even mission-critical characters wouldn't appear unless they were a foot away. And finding the exact enemy you need to beat off is far more difficult than it needs to be. Stronger enemies are a red circle, but there's plenty of non-mission red circles, so you have to find the glowing red circle. It's definitely frustrating at times. Despite my issues, there's a competent game here. Not good, but definitely a full-fledged title, unlike certain other launch titles. There's Japanese voice acting, the graphics definitely couldn't be done on a 3DS, and while the amount of pop-in is unforgivable, there isn't slowdown even with a bunch of enemies on screen. But the gameplay is the most important part, and it's where Samurai Warriors falters. It's just far too basic and slow. All you do is mash Y, sprinkle in an X a few times, then drop a huge A, and you're fine. Chronicles didn't convince me to check out the rest of the Samurai Warriors franchise, but at least it's not the worst 3DS launch game I played. Despite the name, Bust-A-Move Universe didn't make me want to bust. When I think of a launch game, this is what I think about. Something that could have easily been done on the previous hardware, but was released on the new system because you gotta buy something to play on it and they just hope you pick this one. Similar to Peggle, but not really, Bust a Nut has you firing colored balls together hoping to break them. It's not exactly rocket surgery. And that's literally it. Yeah, there's a couple of special shots, but the gameplay never evolves from shooting balls. It's extremely boring, and while fully functional, doesn't offer nearly enough in the way of gameplay or content. There's more to say when it comes to BAM-U, but nothing actually worth talking about. While it's nowhere near as bad as Combat of Giants, Busta Rhymes is just massively disappointing all around. A theme with this video is that I'm dipping my toes into a franchise for the first time. That stays true with The Sims 3. While I'm really good at manipulating people and getting them to do what I want, that's only in real life. So what was it like controlling digital people? Well, I started by creating my sim, Grant Bunch. I took a picture of my celebrity lookalike, Ryan Reynolds, and received the face of an icon. I also granted him the wish of having 10 wives because I just finished watching Under the Banner of Heaven. After getting positively overwhelmed by the tutorial, I gave a strange woman a massage and she just sort of lingered in my house while another random woman danced in my living room for a few hours. The next morning, Grant went to work off screen while I did nothing except read several confusing in-game messages. As I soon learned, apparently Grant has to stay happy, keep a good work ethic, bathe, and spend 3 hours making spaghetti that he eats alone in the kitchen at 2 a.m. I don't put this much effort into my real life, so why would I want to spend all this time on a sim? After an hour of The Sims 3 and Grant creating a puddle in the kitchen while he was making spaghetti and the sink breaking and making another puddle in the kitchen, I still had no idea what the appeal of The Sims was. It all just felt like taking care of a horny adult-sized baby, except with long load times and rough touchscreen controls. I mean, I couldn't even get a girlfriend. I kept inviting random women over and giving them massages like I would in real life, except Grant took them for granted and just kept going to sleep. And when I was sleeping, one of those women left a mess in the bathroom. What the hell? How am I supposed to rate a game I didn't understand? It's a question with no answer. Like, what's the sound of one foot clapping? I guess the answer is I'll put it in F tier and call it a day. You'll probably be surprised when I say this, but the highest reviewed 3DS launch game is Super Street Fighter IV 3D Edition, sitting at an 85 on Metacritic. GameShark even went so far as to say it's the best portable fighting game ever released. My history with fighting games is that I have a few favorites: Smash Bros. Melee, Mortal Kombat Kratos, Soul Calibur 4, and the rest just feel like imitations of my favorites, sort of like when I started dating my ex-wife's twin. With Street Fighter 3DS, I tried to do the training and learn the game to execute perfect combos. It did not go well, so I employed the tried and true strategy of just button mashing, which worked surprisingly well. And whenever I built up enough Thunder Goo, I could tap a button on the bottom screen to unleash a powerful move, rather than having to mess around with memorization or fingering the stick. It's easy to see why so many people fell in love with this game way back in 2011. It looks great, runs smoothly, actually takes advantage of the 3D effect, and Cammy's long back is the stuff of dreams. Plus, we get fully voiced static images in arcade mode. Problem is, a lot of the playable content is gone now in 2024. No one in this day and age has friends to play against, and the online mode has been shut down. So that leaves arcade mode, which is just 1v1s against the CPU using whichever of the game's bajillion characters strikes your fancy. Now, with The Sims 3, I didn't really get it. With Street Fighter 4, I got it. Street Fighter's just not my fighting franchise of choice. I started out arcade mode in normal with Ryu and got stomped by Guile, who block spammed. So I switched to Zangief and used his 2 touchscreen moves to be super cheap and win fight after fight, ultimately beating off the Silver Surfer and learning his name's actually pronounced Zangief, not Zangief. Despite some fun, Street Fighter just never really grabbed me between its juicy thighs and squeezed until I passed out. Still, it deserves a place in B tier because the production values and quality are so high. And regardless of my own personal experience, that's enough to leave it near the top, right next to Ghost Recon. And that'll do it. Looking back, the 3DS launch lineup wasn't great. Nothing comes close to S tier, I can't in good conscience put anything in A tier, and the only 2 games worthy of B tier are Street Fighter and Ghost Recon. On the opposite end of the spectrum, Combat of Giants is one of the worst games I've ever played. As for the rest, especially Nintendo's own launch titles, they're all mostly forgettable. For a fun comparison, what you're seeing is my ranking of every single 3DS launch title. Using the same parameters, A tier is anything 80 or above, and F tier is anything 50 or below. Here's how they all ranked in 2011 according to Metacritic score. There's not much in the way of surprises. Super Street Fighter is the only A tier title, while several of the games in B tier were likely helped out by launch excitement. Or perhaps launch desperation and reviewers feeling that they couldn't be too overly negative about a system that hadn't actually come out yet. But then Nintendo themselves admitted that it sucked and everyone was off the hook. Thankfully, the 3DS rebounded from its terrible launch with a price cut and several great games like Zelda, Mario 3D Land, and Mario Kart 7. In fact, the 3DS was so successful that Nintendo decided to make a Switch console that you could only play portably.